important, though, to understand that not all El Niños are the same. But in our lifetime, we've seen several El Niños, and the closest analogy that I can think of would be the 2015-2016 El Niño. It was also a very strong one, like what we are expecting in the current situation, and the impacts have been really severe.
สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ and welcome to Thai Pulse. The world is closely monitoring El Niño amid growing concern that it could develop into a super El Niño this year.
Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more severe around the world, raising concerns about their impact on economies and food security. And of course, Thailand is no exception. Let's dive right in.
สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ
Thank you very much for joining our program today. So let's get started with the outlook of El Niño in 2026, right? And an update on the situation. How is it right now?
The El Niño is here, and all climate models agree that it will intensify by around August to September. And we can think of the El Niño as something like a giant pot of warm water in the tropical Pacific. And that pot of water is boiling, and if the temperature of that water is above 5 degrees Celsius for at least 3 months, it means that the El Niño is underway. We have already reached that threshold. And most climate models, again, agree, but not all, that this will be a very strong El Niño, potentially one of the strongest since 1950.
Right.
So, how serious is the current outlook, and should the public be concerned about this?
Definitely. We have reasons to be concerned because in the past, El Niño has always been associated with extreme weather and climate events.
Right.
It's a notorious climate phenomenon. And in addition, this year has been really a hot year. It's expected that 2026 will be one of the 4 warmest years on record. And if you felt that May was a very hot month, because it was, it's the 4th warmest on record. So what this means is that we will experience El Niño impacts in an already very warm climate. And this potentially means that the chances of getting an even more serious El Niño impacts compared to the past El Niño events is very high.
Right. So warm climate is one of the effects of El Niño, right? What about other effects, other impacts?
So the main impact of El Niño is that it disrupts rainfall patterns everywhere. And this is a very scientifically complex process because that boiling pot that I described earlier, it's in the tropical Pacific. But what happens in the Pacific does not stay only in the Pacific. It has implications for the weather and climate worldwide.
Right.
So in Southeast Asia, including in Thailand, most El Niño events are associated with dry conditions, drought. And the opposite is in South America, where El Niño is always associated with wet, above normal rainfall conditions. And then in between, you have countries that also become very dry. India, parts of Australia, these are all very drought-prone countries. And there are also secondary impacts to public health. For example, dengue outbreak becomes more common. Haze becomes more common because of the increased chance of getting wildfire. So to answer your question, El Niño is not only a weather story, it is an economic story, it is a public health story, it is also an environmental story.
Yeah. And according to the weathercast and also the news that are talking about this every day now, what we're going to be experiencing is not just the regular El Niño, but super El Niño. So what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, That's a really important question. In other headlines, it's even called a Godzilla El Nino. So there's no official definition of what super El Nino means and what regular El Nino means. But in common discourse, the term super El Nino is reserved to the very strong El Ninos. So going back to the to the warm water analogy that I mentioned earlier, it means that the temperature of that pot boiling in the tropical Pacific is above 2 degrees Celsius compared to the historical average. And again, what it means is, as a general rule, the higher the temperature, the more extreme the impacts will be.
Right. I think in a way they're just trying to make people be aware of how serious the situation is. Like when people say El Nino, people get used to it, like PM 2.5, we get used to it now. But adding the super in front is like adding that impact of awareness to the people.
Definitely. And I think it's a very effective way of communicating to the public. In the past El Nino events, the role of the media in raising awareness, even in stimulating public response, policymaker response to El Nino was very important. So personally, I don't have objections of people using the term super El Nino, even if they don't have an official scientific definition, because I think the point is to take actions to reduce the risk.
Right.
I think before, when you talk about the effect of El Nino, people often think about, the unusually high temperature of the sea, but they don't really know what does it mean in terms of breaking down to the effect on our lives, right? So super El Nino, does it mean it will have a super impact as well?
That's a really good question. And as a general rule, yes. As I mentioned earlier, the process is called teleconnection. The warm pot of water is boiling in the tropical Pacific, but it is disturbing the rainfall and temperature patterns worldwide. It's very important, though, to understand that not all El Ninos are the same. But in our lifetime, we've seen several El Ninos, and the closest analogy that I can think of would be the 2015-2016 El Nino. It was also a very strong one, like what we are expecting in the current situation, and the impacts have been really severe.
And talking about super El Nino, I mean, they're going to be affecting the economy and the food security as well, but how? How is it going to affect these things?
So the agricultural sector would be the front line of El Nino impacts. And because of that, we expect that El Nino, based on what we know from the past, that El Nino will disrupt agricultural production, potentially reducing agricultural production. And the UN World Food Program and the Food and Agricultural Program have already issued an appeal for around 200 million to help communities and countries that are expected to face very severe food security issues during this El Nino. So because of lack of water, very high evapotranspiration because of the heat, then crop production is also expected to decrease. So that's the transmission mechanism. And when crop production is low, it also disrupts the global food trade. And that's where Thailand can actually play a very important global role. Thailand is one of the biggest exporters of food, especially cereals. If Thailand can protect its production levels, if it can protect its agricultural production, then it can play a very important role in stabilizing food security worldwide. And we have to also remember that this year is a really difficult year. We started 2026 with a war that increased the prices of fertilizer and other agricultural inputs, increased the price of oil, and raised prices. So what will happen is if there's additional disruption caused by the lack of water, because El Nino really hits water availability, then we are facing a very serious issues, not only on the weather front, but really also on food, economy, jobs, and even economic growth. In Thailand, for example, in 2015, 2016, El Nino, as I mentioned, it's a very strong one. The direct losses in agriculture was estimated to be about 0.3% of the GDP. That's in the order of billions. So it's a very serious issue, but it does not mean that we cannot do anything. You know, just because it was very damaging in the past does not mean that it can also be, it can also damage this year. There are steps that countries can take to reduce the impacts of El Nino on food security and agriculture in general.
For example?
So Thailand is a very good example of how quick and fast tactical strategy should be implemented during El Nino. The government has already ordered mapping and survey of drought-prone areas. It ordered one agency to coordinate water conservation strategies across the country. And then in addition, it also identified areas where water conservation, agricultural input assistance could be given, so the farming communities don't have to wait until the damage or the crisis is already here before they can act. Other countries in the region are also doing the same. I think it's good that Thailand set an example even before the El Nino was confirmed. It already implemented all these strategies. And one of the lessons that we learned in the past El Ninos is this kind of actions, quick, early, scaled up, are really effective in reducing damages.
Let's talk about trans-border cooperation. Of course, one country cannot do things alone, right?
Yes.
Can we cooperate with our neighboring countries?
Definitely. The ASEAN has an agreement on helping each other in case there's food shortage related to your question, May. In addition, one of the things that we do at ESCAP is to make sure that countries have the data, the latest knowledge of the science, and tools to respond to El Nino. One of the longest running initiative that we have is our cooperation with GISTA, the Space Agency of Thailand. Together with GISTA, we implemented, and we are still doing it in other countries as well, initiatives that would build the capacity of countries to use satellite-derived data to monitor drought and other impacts of not only El Nino, but other climate extremes as well. In the past 2 years, for example, this initiative was really very active in the lower Mekong countries because they are neighbors of Thailand, and also because the vulnerability of these countries is very high. In addition, Thailand is a founding donor of what is called the ESCAP Tsunami and Climate Preparedness Trust Fund. So through the trust fund, Thailand is supporting countries in the whole region, Asia Pacific, in strengthening the early warning systems.
Right.
Now, compared to 1 decade ago, we can say that many countries that participated in the initiatives funded by the trust fund have better early warning systems, better monitoring systems, so they can warn their public, the population, much more in advance, and therefore with information they can be armed to implement more proactive action to reduce the risk. Just very recently, we started working with the DDPM of Thailand to build the capacity of all early warning staff across the country. Together with RIMES, it's another institution, early warning institution funded by the Trust Fund, to make sure that across the country there's capacity to implement early warning. But as I said, it's not just in Thailand, but it's in Asia Pacific in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we take our first break, I would like to ask you another question about the impact. I mean, El Nino is emerging, definitely. But what kind of impact are we facing, especially countries in Asia and in the Pacific?
We can rely on history to tell us what are the foreseeable impacts. These are really well documented. There are places that are called El Nino hotspots. So in Southeast Asia, the dominant impact is really dry conditions and drought. That's very clear. Indonesia, Philippines, they also face additional risk of higher incidents of forest fires. These are the secondary impacts. In other places, dengue outbreak becomes even more serious. In Timor-Leste, for example, food security is the most critical impact of El Nino. And then, as I mentioned earlier, other countries like some parts of Australia, they also faced incidents of increased drought risk. But very interestingly, we have to also bear in mind that even if drought is the most dominant impact, it does not mean that you cannot have flood within this period. Time and time again, we are learning that the climate is such a complex system that even within a generally warm season, you can have localized flooding. So it really informs as well. This complexity of the climate should guide our preparation in terms of how we mitigate the impacts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let us take a short break, and when we return, we'll focus on the lessons learned from previous El Nino events. Stay with us.
Thailand steps onto the global economic stage once again. In 2026, we are honored to host the annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group, or the IMF World Bank Group Annual Meetings 2026. Often compared to the Financial Olympics, this platform gathers leaders and high-level representatives from 191 countries worldwide to shape the global economic and financial direction. Come make an impact and drive the future of the global economy together, right here in Thailand. The meetings will take place from October 12th to the 18th, 2026, at the Queen Sirikit National Convention Center.
Welcome back to Thai Pulse. In this segment, we talk about the impact on Thailand's economy.
Yes, we're gonna move back to Thailand now. So, which sectors in Thailand should be particularly concerned about this emerging El Nino?
So water resources and agriculture are the front line of El Nino impacts, because El Nino affects water availability. And in the past, the direct losses suffered by agriculture reach as high as 0.3% of the GDP. That's during the last strong episode as well of El Nino 2015-2016. Public health, as I mentioned, would be also a big concern. There are secondary impacts that will be caused, for example, by forest fires and increased incidence of, potentially increased incidence of dengue. We can also anticipate some issues related to the tourism sector due to heat stress mainly. So I would say that these three sectors are really at the front line of El Nino impacts. In the past, when the weather and climate have negative impacts, households rely on remittances, external remittances. But this year, as we have all seen, many of those households are no longer able to rely on external remittances because many lost their jobs due mainly to the war in the Middle East. So that's one complicating factor that will affect the capacities of many households to adapt or to deal with the impacts of El Nino.
This kind of unusual weather pattern is not the first time, right? You mentioned it before that we experienced it already in the past. So what were the biggest or most significant lessons that we learned in terms of prevention from the past experience?
In our lifetime, I think I'm so much older than both of you, but we've lived through three very strong El Nino episodes. 87, 88, 82, 83, and then 15, 16 El Nino. That's the most recent, strongest event. I would like to highlight three things that we learned. And by the way, I was involved in a book project that looked at the lessons in 22 countries, like what have we learned, because this is a global phenomenon. And the first thing that we learn is about the climate itself. We know that there are El Nino hotspots. We know that there are foreseeable impacts, but climate has a way of surprising us.
Yeah.
As I said, a very dry year could have a localized flooding in between. The second lesson that I would like to highlight is the value of preparedness. Countries that use seasonal climate forecasts to implement strategies and implement early action were able to minimize the damage. So history really is not destiny. What happened in the past in terms of the damage, we can reduce them with early action. And then the third one that I would like to highlight, because this is what we are doing now, is the value of the role of the media in stimulating public discussions, in encouraging policymakers to do something about El Nino. I would really encourage the media to continue your education function. And as I said, El Nino will intensify around August, September. And on top of that, we are dealing with a very hot year. So climate will always be on the headlines. And it's important to keep the discussion going. Because there's also another effect, right? We could get used to it and we don't talk about it anymore. For us, maybe in an air-conditioned room or people who don't depend on farming for livelihoods, we don't feel the impact. I think we feel the impact through how much we can put in our grocery bags. But for people who are really on the front line, people who work outside doing construction when it's very hot, or farmers who depend on their seasonal income to send their children to school, to earn their incomes, these very small rainfall deviations can be really serious. So it's good to keep the attention, not only during El Nino years, but as a part of our long-term public agenda, I would say.
But as an ordinary person, how can you help the world fighting against El Nino? What can you do?
That's a very important question. And by the way, I think there's no such thing as ordinary because we are all contribute. I would say that it depends on the role that we have. For both of you, it's your role to advocate, your education role. For us at ESCAP, it's our role to put out analysis and to recommend policy actions to governments. we can help by documenting what are the good practices. We can help create a platform within ESCAP that can share these good practices elsewhere. And if I may mention, I forgot to mention earlier, in October, GISDA and ESCAP will co-organize a ministerial meeting on space applications for sustainable development. Not only the countries that have satellite programs can make use of advances in space technologies to deal with the impacts of El Nino and other climate extremes.
Right.
Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned ESCAP, right? So my question is, what has ESCAP and Thailand done together to help prepare Thailand for El Nino or other climate-related disasters?
So as I mentioned, Thailand is the founding donor of the ESCAP Tsunami and Climate Preparedness Trust Fund. It's not only helping Thailand, but also within Thailand. So very recently, if I may repeat this, we started a project together with RIMES and DDPM to build the capacities of early warning experts within the country to assess what are the impacts of El Nino and other weather and climate extremes, and to make sure that this kind of impacts are communicated, number one, and number two, understood by policy makers. This collaboration with Thai agencies is not only on the disaster side, but also on the use of space technologies.
Right. What about other sectors, for example, private sector, public sector? How can they contribute to helping to fight against this phenomenon?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why the Asia Pacific is vulnerable to the impacts of El Nino and other climate extremes is because of the very low insurance coverage.
Right.
And that's one area where the private sector can really come in. I'm not a I'm not a finance specialist, but that's one area where the public sector and the private sector, specifically financial institutions, can really work together. How do we increase the uptake of crop insurance, for example? So when crops fail, and when strategies like the one you mentioned, May, planting early, planting crops that require less water, or not planting at all. When these strategies fail, as a last resort, how do we make sure that they have insurance coverage? So I think this is one area that we can really improve. Another area is in the aspect of technologies. A lot of the enabling technologies that are needed to cope with the impacts of climate change, including the current El Nino, has to do with technologies, seeds, agricultural inputs. These are all in the domain of the private sector. So how do we make sure that it's accessible to the farming communities who need it?
Thank you very much for joining our program. ขอบคุณค่ะ
ขอบคุณค่ะ While extreme climate events cannot always be prevented, but through cooperation and timely action can help reduce their impact and also strengthen resilience for communities across the region.
And that's all for Thai Pulse this weekend. We see you again. สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ